So if we had just entered the scope, inheritance and variation of traits for second grade, the first thing we would do would either be to toggle here to our home drop down, or to look over here on the right under essentials. The content is the same in both of those sections. So this is extremely helpful for planning purposes. So we'll start here with the standards unwrapped, and for us in Tennessee, there is one standard covered in this scope, a cross-cutting concept of patterns, and a science engineering practice of analyzing and interpreting data. And when we get our scope and sequence charts, this will be included as well in those. I'll be making those just as I did last year. And so all this information will be synthesized into that document, but it's also right here for you as well, so that you can see what standard or standards, science and engineering practices, what cross-cutting concepts are incorporated in that one scope. And that terminology, if it's new to you, will be covered in the self-paced NGSS 3-hour course that you will be engaging with by next week. So in this particular one, we're going to use evidence to explain that living things have physical traits inherited from parents, and that variation from these traits exists in groups of similar organisms. So everything that students will be engaging in throughout the scope will be leading them back toward mastery of that skill. And then you can also see that patterns are observed in nature regarding how that organisms, inherit traits, and also how that environmental factors relate to genetics as well. And then the analyzing and interpreting data point is included in this, and it goes into in-depth discussion about what that looks like. Then one thing that is particularly helpful about the standards portion is it talks about what are the verbs that students are using as they engage in this learning. Particularly important when you're talking about inquiry-based learning. So students are going to use evidence, so in other words, information that will support an idea, and then they're going to be able to explain. So that gets you back to those skills and the higher order thinking skills. Thinking about blooms is what that means to me. And then also what nouns are here, also related to some of the vocabulary for the unit. And then also you can see how that this particular scope and the standard that's included in it relates to what students learned prior. So again, this is second grade, and students first learned a bit about heredity in kindergarten when they made observations to describe that young plants and animals resemble their parents. So that's where students might have some prior knowledge that they're bringing into this scope that you can access. So there they were just making observations to describe. Here we can see that they are using evidence to explain. So you can definitely see the progression of thinking skills from kindergarten to second grade there. All right, I'm going to move back. Then teacher background. So this is just very helpful to refer back to for ourselves as professionals, just some background knowledge about inheritance, heredity, as we're thinking about preparing for these lessons with students. Then all of the answer keys for any of the activities are included here. You'll also see them within the individual E's, but they're all here in one place for you as well. So they're just right there. Then the materials list, that tells you for the hands-on components, what is needed for Engage, what is needed for Explore. And then there are some hands-on components in Explain and Literacy here. More so, it looks like for this one though, if we were in person, some consumables as far as handouts. Now, everything that you will see in here that students will engage in as far as like explain, elaborate, evaluate, intervention, acceleration, those can definitely be done through Google Classroom, and the resources to do so are already provided within STEMscopes, which is fantastic. But you can put in here when you're thinking about supplies needed for hands-on materials, you can put in the number of your students, maximum number per groups, and it's going to give you tell you what you need to make that happen. So extremely handy. Point of reference for hands-on learning, I ordered enough materials last year, which we still have many of those unused, for middle school to be no more than 3 students in a group, and then typically just in pairs for younger students, for K through 5 students, to make facilitating those hands-on lessons much more feasible and helpful for students. Since I know how that too many students in a group can sometimes impair learning. All right, I'm going to hit my back button, hitting it one more time. All right, now that I have looked a bit at what is incorporated in the scope, I'm going to go to Engage. And a question that I want you to ponder as we're looking through here is, what is already here for me to use with a virtual instruction, and what am I going to need to modify for virtual instruction? And think through that. We'll discuss that more on Friday when we have our synchronous session for planning, and then certainly on the 12th when our STEM coach has our session with us, our virtual session with us. So you'll notice there's the T for teacher, S for students. So the Engage is a hook. And because we really want to get students excited and engaged about science from the very beginning of each scope. Pique their curiosity. That's what science is all about. And so when we think about our 5 E's, we're going to engage students with an activity or question, phenomena, which you'll hear more about as we continue in our professional development over these 2 weeks about science. And that self-paced 3-hour course, there's quite a bit about phenomena and how it relates to 5E and inquiry-based instruction in STEMscopes. So we're really trying to cultivate that natural curiosity that kids have with the Engage. So that is that hook. And if we look at this one, then this one is a survey with students for students to think about their own traits. So they're provided a mirror, and then they're asked questions about their own traits and that of peers. Obviously, that'll look a little different in a virtual setting, but can certainly, still be done. And so there's also some language acquisition strategies built in here as well, as that extra piece to differentiate for students, which is very handy that that's already here. There's also more resources right here as well with the STEM Coach in Action. And you'll notice over here that in many of these, or actually most, there will be a print file as well that you can just click and then download. You could either print, have in Google Classroom. It's just right there, very handy for us. And then if I click on the S for the student, then this is going to take me to that same survey that is done on a computer, right? Either I have the print version on the, here on the teacher page. Here on, when I click on the S, I have that survey for the computer-based. And when we get our accounts up and running, have our students imported in here, then we can directly assign that to students through Google Classroom. So extremely handy. So after we've hooked students, then we want to explore science. We want them to explore science. So that whole approach of before they even, talk about the vocabulary explicitly, they have engaged in an exploration, whether that's an activity, an investigation, something hands-on where they can look at the phenomena, look and see what's happening, and start to draw some hypotheses for themselves. So I'll bring us back to explore. So now students are ready to engage in something hands-on and where they can acquire some new concepts, some new skills, because they're getting to see it, to experience it. So you can see that there are two experiences, to explore experiences in this scope. There is an activity and an engineering solution. In planning, we'll talk more about, it is always, it's my preference that we start with the activity first, or an investigation first, and then we move later on if there's additional time in the scope during that week or so that we're teaching that particular scope. That then we will come back and do an engineering solution as second, if time allows. And a lot of times we might choose to do that if we see that students need more exposure to a particular concept to really master those concepts and to truly get a good grasp of the standards and the cross-cutting concepts and science engineering practices built in. Could also be because students are particularly interested in a topic, and so they're excited about it. And so later on in the scope, you see you've got time, and you can come back and do that engineering solution. But we'll want to start with just doing one thing from the Explore tab. Then we'll move on to explain with students the next day. So in this particular one, we're looking at random variation in this activity. It tells us all the printed material, reusable material, consumable material that we would need to have prepped beforehand. It tells us about the prep for this activity, things we might want to consider for facilitation. And it gives very particular guidance on facilitating. Language acquisition strategies and intervention for students. So this language acquisition strategy would be great to do with students right after they've completed the activity. So you can see in this one, students are going to be creating the offspring of two plants by randomly choosing two traits. So they're actually looking at, and then you'll see that all of the materials are included right over here at the right. So all you've got to do for this one is just print those out. There aren't a lot of, things like seeds in this one, which sometimes that might actually be in a hands-on activity, right? There'll be various materials needed for these, and we do work hard to provide those for our hands-on lessons. Again, we'll have to